I was 2 years into my job as a patrol officer when I got called out to that house. You know, the one that every cop in the precinct avoids like the plague. A crumbling 2-story house on the corner of Pine and Holloway. Kids dared each other to touch the gate. Neighbors swore they heard voices, and there were enough calls from that address to make it infamous. Domestic disturbances, strange noises, lights flickering at night. Classic urban horror stuff. It was 11:48 p.m., a Thursday night, and I was only a few hours from wrapping up my shift. Dispatch came through my radio, Unit 12, respond to a 10-31 at 2406 Pine Street. Caller reports seeing figures inside the house. Breaking and entering, I thought. Standard procedure, nothing new. But I'd heard the stories, the whispers in the locker room. Still, I had a job to do. Copy that, dispatch. On my way. When I pulled up, my headlights sliced through the fog that clung to the house like a second skin. The gate creaked open in the wind, the porch light flickered sporadically, and the front door hung slightly ajar. The air felt wrong, heavy, suffocating. I radioed in. This is Unit 12. Arrived on scene. Door appears to be open. Proceeding to check. As I stepped onto the porch, my boots echoed hollowly on the rotting wood. I could feel the weight of the house's reputation pressing down on me. No backup, just me and my flashlight. And then I heard it, a soft, dragging noise coming from somewhere inside. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges screaming like they hadn't been oiled in decades. The interior of the house smelled like mildew and something faintly metallic, blood, maybe. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper, overturned furniture, and thick layers of dust. It didn't look like anyone had lived here in years, but the dragging sound was unmistakable. Came from the second floor. I swallowed hard and tried to focus on my training. It's just an abandoned house. Probably some teenagers messing around, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I wasn't prepared for. As I ascended the stairs, they groaned under my weight, each creak threatening to give away my position. My flashlight flickered, the battery momentarily sputtering before the beam steadied again. The dragging sound was louder now, punctuated by faint whispers. My pulse quickened. "Police!" I called out, my voice breaking the silence like a gunshot. "If someone's here, come out with your hands where I can see them." The dragging stopped. So did the whispers. For a moment, the house was dead silent except for the sound of my breathing. I reached the top of the stairs and scanned the narrow hallway. There were 4 doors, 2 on the left, 1 on the right, and 1 at the end of the hall. The air was colder up here, biting against my skin. Then the door at the end of the hall creaked open. Not all the way, just a sliver, enough for my flashlight to catch the edge of something moving inside. A shadow, jagged and angular, darted across the gap like it was slithering just out of view. I gripped my flashlight tighter, feeling the sweat on my palm. My free hand hovered over my sidearm. "This is the police," I shouted again. "Come out now or I'll—" A loud thud cut me off. It came from behind the partially open door. Then came the dragging noise again, closer this time, like it was moving toward the doorway. My gut told me to get the hell out of there, but I'd signed up for this. I wasn't about to back down now. I moved closer, my footsteps deliberate, my flashlight fixed on the widening crack of the door. When I reached it, I used the edge of the flashlight to nudge the door open the rest of the way. And that's when I saw her, a woman, hunched over in the corner of the room, her back to me. Her hair was long, tangled, and matted with something dark. Her bare feet were caked in filth, and her fingers, oh God, her fingers, were bent at impossible angles, scraping against the wooden floor as she dragged something heavy toward her lap. "Ma'am," I said, my voice trembling despite my best effort to sound authoritative. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" She froze. Slowly, her head turned. Not her body, just her head, twisting unnaturally until I was staring into a face that wasn't human. Her eyes were pitch black, her mouth stretched into a grin too wide for her face. She tilted her head, studying me like I was the one out of place. And then she spoke. "Why did you come alone?" Her voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in unison, reverberating in my skull like nails on a chalkboard. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, grabbing for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the wood had fused together, sealing me inside the room. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I turned back toward the woman, or whatever she was. She hadn't moved from her spot in the corner, but her grin was wider now, her head tilting further to the side, as if she found my panic amusing. "Stay back," I barked, drawing my sidearm. My voice was shaky, adrenaline pounding in my ears. "I'll shoot if I have to." She didn't flinch. Instead, she began to rise, her movements unnatural, like a marionette being yanked upward by invisible strings. Her limbs hung loose, her head lolling to one side. Whatever she'd been dragging across the floor was still clutched in her gnarled fingers. A small, child-sized shoe. "Do you know what happened here?" she asked, her voice dripping with malice. She took a step forward, her bare feet silent on the wood, and the room seemed to darken, as though the very air was being sucked into her. I aimed the gun at her center mass. "Stop moving. Get on the ground." Her laugh was hollow, echoing off the walls. It sounded wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. She took another step, and this time, her body distorted, her torso bending sideways while her legs remained still. The way she moved wasn't just unnatural, it was impossible. And then I saw it, the shadows behind her. They weren't her shadow or mine, or anything that should have been cast by the light in the room. They writhed like living things, growing and twisting, crawling up the walls and ceiling like black vines. "Do you know what they did to me?" she hissed, her voice no longer layered but shrill and full of rage. "Do you know what they buried here?" I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing, my hands shaking so violently that my gun nearly slipped from my grip. The shadows crept closer, reaching for me, and the air in the room grew heavier, colder. Suddenly, the door behind me rattled violently, like someone, or something, was trying to break it down. A deep, guttural growl echoed from the hallway outside. Whatever was out there wasn't human. Pinned between the woman and the door, I made a split-second decision. I fired. The bullet struck her in the chest, but she didn't react. No flinch, no stumble, nothing. She looked down at the wound, black ooze dripping from it instead of blood, and then back at me with those pitch-black eyes. "Your little toys won't help you," she said, her voice mocking. "But you can try again if it makes you feel brave." The door behind me slammed once more, and I realized the growling wasn't stopping. It was getting louder, more feral, as though whatever was out there was seconds away from breaking through. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. My mind raced, grasping for any solution. And then I remembered my radio. I fumbled for it, keeping my gun trained on the woman as I pressed the button. "This is Unit 12. I need backup at 2406 Pine Street. Code 3. Now." The static on the other end was deafening. For a moment I thought no one would respond. Then, through the crackling, a voice came through. "You shouldn't have gone in there," the voice said. It wasn't dispatch. It wasn't even human. I dropped the radio like it had burned me. The shadows were nearly on me now, curling around my legs, pulling at me like hands. The woman stepped closer, her grin splitting her face almost in half. And then the growling stopped. The door behind me burst open with a force that knocked me forward. I hit the floor hard, my flashlight skittering across the room. When I looked up, the woman was gone. But the shadows? The shadows stayed. I scrambled to my feet, my legs like jelly, and snatched my flashlight from the floor. The room was dimming fast, the shadows creeping across the walls like oil slicks. They weren't just moving, they were alive, pulsing with intent. I didn't wait to see what they intended to do. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway outside was no better. The growling was gone, replaced by something worse. Silence. A thick, oppressive silence that made my ears ring. My flashlight flickered as I swung it down the hall, catching glimpses of movement, just at the edges of the beam. Shadows darted from door to door, too fast to make sense of, too deliberate to dismiss as my imagination. "This is Unit 12. I whispered into my radio, my voice trembling. "I need assistance now. Is anyone receiving this?" More static. Then, faintly, the same voice as before. "Run." I didn't need to be told twice. I sprinted down the hall, not caring about noise anymore, not caring about protocol. I just wanted to get out of that house. My boots pounded against the warped floorboards, my flashlight's beam bouncing erratically. I hit the stairs 2 at a time, the whole house seeming to groan and shift with every step. And then I heard it, the sound of something chasing me. It wasn't footsteps. It was wet, like a thick, sloshing drag that echoed behind me, growing louder with every second. I didn't dare look back. Whatever was following me, I didn't want to see it. The front door was in sight now, the beam of my flashlight catching the peeling paint and rusted hinges. I reached for the knob, my fingers grazing the cold metal, and the door slammed shut in my face. "No, no, no!" I yanked at the knob, but it wouldn't budge. The sloshing sound was right behind me now, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I spun around, raising my flashlight and sidearm in the same motion. The hallway was empty, but the walls, oh God, the walls, they were melting. The floral wallpaper dripped like wax, revealing black, pulsating veins beneath it. The ceiling sagged, thick drops of some viscous, tar-like substance falling to the floor and hissing as they hit. The air reeked of sulfur and rot, burning my nostrils with every breath. And then, from the darkness at the top of the stairs, I saw it. At first, it was just a silhouette, a hulking, misshapen figure that didn't move like anything human. It slithered and jerked as it descended the stairs, its limbs stretching and contorting unnaturally. The closer it got, the more detail I could make out. Its skin was slick and mottled, like rotting flesh left too long in water. Its head was too large for its body, with empty, gaping eye sockets and a mouth that stretched from ear to ear, filled with jagged yellow teeth. It let out a sound, something between a scream and a laugh, that rattled the walls. My instincts took over. I fired my gun, unloading 3 rounds into the thing's chest. The sound was deafening in the confined space, but the creature didn't stop. If anything, it seemed amused, tilting its head as black ichor oozed from the wounds. "Come on!" I shouted, backing toward the door. "What the hell are you?" It didn't answer. It just kept coming, its movements becoming faster, more frantic. And then I remembered the windows. I turned and smashed the butt of my flashlight into the nearest one, the glass shattering with a satisfying crash. Cold night air rushed in, and I wasted no time climbing through, ignoring the shards that tore at my uniform. The moment my feet hit the ground outside, the house seemed to shudder behind me. I didn't stop running. I sprinted to my cruiser, threw myself inside, and slammed the door shut. But as I reached for the ignition, I froze. The house was watching me. Every window glowed faintly, like eyes reflecting moonlight, and the front door creaked open just a crack. The air around it seemed to ripple, distorting like heat waves, and I could feel the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, daring me to come back. My hands were trembling so badly that it took me 3 tries to start the engine. When the car roared to life, I slammed it into gear and peeled out, the tires screeching as I tore down the street. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights of a gas station. Only then did I let myself breathe, my chest heaving as I gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I glanced at the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't left that house alone. I sat in my cruiser under the gas station lights, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, replaying everything I'd just seen. The woman, the shadows, that thing on the stairs. My training taught me how to deal with armed suspects, car chases, even violent standoffs. But whatever was in that house, there wasn't a protocol for it. I fumbled for my radio again, hoping, praying, for some normalcy. "This is Unit 12, I said, my voice shaky. "I've left the scene, requesting backup to 2406 Pine Street." Immediate response required. Silence. I tried again, pressing the button harder, as if that would make a difference. Dispatch, do you copy? I need confirmation. Finally, the static cleared, and a voice came through. But it wasn't dispatch. You shouldn't have left, it said, low and guttural, echoing through the cruiser's small cabin. I dropped the radio, the sound of it clattering to the floor barely registering. My heart felt like it had stopped. Slowly, I turned to look at the back seat. It was still empty, but the air inside the cruiser had changed. It was colder, so cold I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. The smell of sulfur was back, faint but unmistakable. And then, from the rearview mirror, I saw it. A flicker of movement, something darting across the back window. I spun around, my flashlight in hand, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness beyond the gas station's lights. Get it together, I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. I was safe, out of the house, away from whatever was inside. But then the lights around the gas station began to flicker. I stared at them, watching as they buzzed and dimmed, the world outside my cruiser growing darker by the second. A low hum filled the air, rising in pitch until it felt like it was drilling into my skull. And then, without warning, the engine died. The hum stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it was suffocating. The only sound was my breathing, shallow and rapid. I tried the ignition, turning the key over and over, but the engine wouldn't start. The dashboard lights flickered briefly before going out entirely. And then I saw it. In the gas station's reflection, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing just outside my car. It wasn't human. Couldn't be. It was too tall, too thin. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, staring at me through the windshield. I froze, my mind screaming at me to move, but my body wouldn't obey. The thing didn't move either, just stood there, its outline barely visible in the dying light. And then it began to smile. Not a normal smile. This was something grotesque, its mouth stretching across its entire face, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at me, its clawed finger tapping the windshield once, twice. Crack. The glass began to spiderweb under the pressure, and that was all it took to break my paralysis. I grabbed my door handle and threw it open, stumbling out of the cruiser and into the cold night. My boots slipped on the gravel, and I fell hard, scraping my palms as I hit the ground. When I looked up, the figure was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my head darting in every direction. The gas station was completely dark now, its windows blackened. The road behind me was empty, the fog thicker than before. And then I heard it. A voice, soft and childlike, whispering my name. Officer Daniels. It came from the darkness beyond the gas pumps. Why did you leave us? My flashlight shook in my hand as I aimed it toward the sound. The beam cut through the fog, illuminating nothing, just the empty lot. Officer Daniels. The voice came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching the gravel just beyond my light. I backed up, my hand on my sidearm. Stay back, I shouted, my voice cracking. I'll shoot. The footsteps stopped. And then I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the fog. They blinked in unison, watching me, surrounding me. My flashlight flickered again, and I realized they weren't attached to anything human. They were floating, suspended in the darkness like disembodied watchers. The whispers started again, all around me now, overlapping and echoing. You shouldn't have left. Why did you run? Come back. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. My boots pounded against the pavement as I sprinted into the night, the fog swallowing me whole. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. By the time I reached the main road, my lungs were on fire, my legs shaking beneath me. Headlights appeared in the distance, and I flagged the car down, practically throwing myself into its path. The driver, a wide-eyed man in his 40s, rolled down the window, his expression alarmed. What the hell's going on? He asked. "Drive," I gasped, yanking open the passenger door. "Just drive." He didn't ask questions. The moment I was inside, he slammed on the gas, and the car sped down the road, leaving the fog and the whispers behind. I didn't look back. I filed my report the next day, but I left out the details, most of them anyway. I said I responded to a break-in, found no suspects, and cleared the scene. What else could I say? That I'd been chased by shadows and things that shouldn't exist? They'd think I'd lost my mind. But I can't stop thinking about that house, about what's buried inside it, and about the eyes that followed me into the night. It's been 2 weeks since that night, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. No matter where I go, no matter how bright the room is, there's always a flicker of movement just outside my vision. I've stopped sleeping. Every time I close my eyes, I see that woman's twisted grin, or those glowing eyes in the fog, or worse, that thing with the jagged smile tapping on my windshield. The nightmares are relentless. In them, I'm back at the house. The walls are alive, the shadows crawling toward me. The air is thick with whispers, calling my name over and over. And then I see them. The glowing eyes, the figure at the top of the stairs. Every time, it ends the same way. I wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, convinced I'm not alone. But here's the thing. I'm starting to believe I'm not alone. Started small. Little things I could explain away. My keys weren't where I left them. My coffee mug slid to the edge of the counter when no one was in the kitchen. My radio at the station crackled with faint whispers whenever I walked by. Then it escalated. Last night, I was in my apartment, watching TV, trying to distract myself from the creeping dread that had become my constant companion. The room was dark, the only light coming from the flickering screen. And then the TV turned off. I stared at the black screen, my own pale reflection staring back at me. I grabbed the remote and tried to turn it back on, but the power button didn't respond. That's when I saw it. In the reflection, just behind me was a shadow. It was tall, impossibly thin, its head cocked to the side in a way that made my stomach twist. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the TV, the shadow was closer. I don't remember much after that. Just that I grabbed my keys, my flashlight, and my gun, and I left. I drove aimlessly for hours, the empty streets of the city offering no comfort. Every time I stopped at a red light, I felt eyes on me, like something was in the car with me, hiding just out of view. I ended up parked outside the precinct, staring at the building, wondering if I should go inside and tell someone. But what would I even say? "Hi, I think I brought something back with me from that haunted house on Pine Street, and now it's following me everywhere I go. Could you maybe look into that?" They'd think I was insane. Hell, I think I'm insane. But here's the thing. I'm not the only one. This morning, I found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of my cruiser. The paper was old and yellowed, the handwriting jagged and hurried. It said, "I saw it too. The house won't let you go. It never does. No signature, no clue who left it. But now I can't stop thinking about the others. The ones who came before me, the officers who responded to calls at that house and never talked about it after. The ones who left the force, disappeared, or turned up dead under circumstances no one wanted to explain. I don't know how this ends. All I know is it's not over. And if you're ever on Pine Street and you see that house, don't go inside." I thought that note under my windshield was the worst of it. A warning, a chilling sign that someone else out there knew the truth. But I was wrong. That note wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. 3 days after I found it, things escalated. I was parked in the precinct lot, trying to force down a cup of coffee and convince myself I could survive another shift. The fog in my head wasn't just exhaustion anymore. It was something deeper, like my mind was fighting to push out memories it didn't want to keep. That's when I got the call. "Unit 12, respond to a 10 to 31 on Pine Street." My blood turned to ice. Pine Street, that house. I fumbled for the radio, barely able to form words. "Dispatch, can you repeat that? Did you say Pine Street?" Static crackled on the other end. Then a voice came through, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't dispatch. "You have to come back," it said. I dropped the radio, my hands trembling. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't possible. But when I glanced at the address on the screen of my dashboard computer, there it was, 2406 Pine Street. Same house, same nightmare. I should have ignored it, turned off the radio, gone home, pretended I didn't hear it. But something pulled at me, a force I couldn't explain. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity, or maybe it was the house itself calling me back. By the time I realized I was driving, I was already halfway there. The street was just as I remembered it. Quiet, suffocatingly still, the fog clinging to the pavement like it had a life of its own. The house loomed in the distance, its windows black and empty, its front door slightly ajar, just like before. I parked at the curb, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The engine idled, the headlights cutting through the fog, illuminating the crooked gate and the overgrown yard. And then, without warning, the engine died. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then went out, leaving me in darkness. I stared at the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to go in. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay in the car, lock the doors, and wait for the sun to rise. But then I saw them. Shadows. Dozens of them, moving inside the house, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke caught in a breeze. They weren't random, they were waiting. For me. I stepped out of the car, my flashlight cutting through the fog as I approached the gate. The air felt heavier with every step, like something was pressing down on me, daring me to turn back. The gate swung open on its own. I hesitated, my breath visible in the cold night air. My hand hovered over my radio, but I knew it wouldn't work. Nothing normal worked here. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the darkness inside swallowing my flashlight's beam. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Rotting furniture, peeling wallpaper, the smell of mildew and decay. But there was something new. The whispers. They were louder this time, echoing from every corner of the house, overlapping and indecipherable. They weren't coming from the shadows or the walls. They were coming from underneath me. I followed the sound, my feet carrying me toward the basement door. It was open, a faint orange light spilling out from the depths below. I didn't want to go down there. Every instinct told me to turn around and run. But I couldn't. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, the air growing colder with every step. The orange light flickered like fire, casting long, dancing shadows across the damp concrete walls. When I reached the bottom, I saw it. A circle, etched into the floor, glowing faintly with an unnatural light. Symbols I didn't recognize surrounded it, carved deep into the concrete. And standing in the center of the circle was her. The woman. Her back was to me, her long, matted hair draped over her shoulders. She was humming softly, the same haunting melody I'd heard in my nightmares. "Why did you come back?" she asked without turning around. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. "You should have stayed away," she continued, her voice cold and sharp. "But now you're here, and the house, it doesn't let you leave twice." She turned slowly, her black eyes locking onto mine. Her smile was wider now, stretching across her face in a way that made my stomach churn. The shadows began to pour into the room, crawling down the walls and pooling at her feet. They reached for me, cold tendrils brushing against my boots, pulling me closer to the circle. I raised my flashlight, my sidearm, anything to stop them. But it was useless. The house had me. And then, just as the shadows reached my chest, I heard it. A voice, faint and familiar, coming from my radio. "Daniels, wake up." It was my partner's voice. The voice snapped me out of my trance. It was Garrett, my partner before he retired last year. But how? He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this call. "Daniels, listen to me. You have to move. Now." The shadows coiled tighter around me, icy and suffocating. The woman in the circle tilted her head, her grin faltering slightly as the radio crackled again. "Move!" Garrett's voice roared through the static, and I felt a surge of adrenaline kick in. I aimed my flashlight directly at the circle on the floor and took a chance. Without thinking, I threw it as hard as I could into the center. The light hit the ground, shattering in a burst of sparks, and for a moment, the shadows recoiled like snakes struck by fire. The woman screamed. It wasn't human. It was this guttural, ear-splitting wail that reverberated through the basement, shaking the walls and sending shards of concrete raining down from the ceiling. The shadows writhed violently, releasing me as they whipped through the room in a chaotic frenzy. That was my chance. I turned and bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. The walls trembled around me, cracks spidering across the wood and plaster as the entire house seemed to groan in protest. The whispers followed me, louder now, frantic and angry. "Don't leave. You belong to us. Come back." I hit the main floor and sprinted for the front door, but as I reached it, it slammed shut in my face. The temperature dropped instantly, frost creeping up the walls and coating the floor beneath my boots. Behind me, I heard the woman's voice again, layered and monstrous. "You can't escape. The house wants you." I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for my gun, even though I knew it was useless. She was there, standing at the bottom of the stairs, her body jerking and twitching unnaturally as she started to ascend. The shadows trailed behind her like a cloak, spreading out across the floor and walls, reaching for me. "Garrett!" I screamed into the radio, desperation clawing at my throat. "What the hell do I do?" His voice came through again, calm but firm. "The windows, Daniels. Break the damn windows." Without hesitation, I grabbed the closest piece of furniture, an old chair, and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass shattered, the icy air rushing out into the night. The effect was immediate. The house let out a groan, deeper and louder than before, like it was in pain. The shadows recoiled again, shrinking away from the broken window. I didn't waste any time. I dove through the jagged opening, ignoring the sharp sting of glass cutting into my arms and legs as I tumbled onto the overgrown lawn. Behind me, the house screamed. The entire structure shuddered, its walls collapsing inward as if it were imploding. The windows shattered one by one, and the front door burst off its hinges. I scrambled to my feet, blood dripping from my cuts, and ran as far as I could. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I turned to look back. The house was gone. Not just collapsed, gone. Where it had stood, there was nothing but an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and blanketed in fog. My radio crackled again. "Daniels," Garrett's voice said. It was quieter now, almost distant. "You made it, but it'll never stop watching." I tried to respond, but the radio went dead. It's been 3 days since the house disappeared, and I'm still trying to process what happened. I went back to the precinct, but when I asked about Garrett, the other officers just stared at me. "Garrett retired 6 months ago," one of them said. "He's off the grid now. No phone, no contact. You know that." I don't know how to explain what I heard on the radio, or how Garrett knew what to do. I tried calling him, but his numbers disconnected. And last night, as I sat in my apartment, staring at the scars on my arms, I heard something. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. It said, "You left, but you didn't escape. I don't know if I can outrun it." Maybe Garrett was right. Maybe the house never really lets you go. And if you ever find yourself on Pine Street, remember this: don't stop, don't look, and for the love of God, don't go inside. You'd think that would be the end of it. I sure did. I mean, what more could the house, or whatever it is, do now? It was gone, erased like it had never existed. But the thing is, when something like that gets its claws into you, it doesn't just let go. Started small, just like before. Shadows moving where they shouldn't. Doors in my apartment creaking open when I knew I'd closed them. At first, I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. Leftover adrenaline, paranoia. But then the dreams started again. In them, I was back at the house. Not as it was when I went in, but as it used to be. The walls were pristine, the floors polished, sunlight streaming through the windows. It was almost beautiful, but no matter how warm it looked, I could feel it watching me. In every dream, I'd wander through the house, drawn to the basement door. I'd hear voices, familiar voices, Garrett. Dispatch. Even my own. They'd call me down, telling me to open the door to come back. And every time, just as my hand reached for the doorknob, I'd wake up. But last night was different. Last night I didn't wake up. I was standing in the empty lot where the house used to be, the fog thick around my ankles. It was silent, so silent I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I wasn't sure how I'd gotten there, but I knew I wasn't alone. Daniels. The voice came from behind me. I spun around, and there he was, Garrett. He looked just like I remembered. Same buzz cut, same tired eyes, but there was something off about him. His skin was too pale, his movements too rigid, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice hollow. "I didn't," I said, my throat dry. "I didn't come back. I don't want to be here." He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter. You're part of it now." "Part of what?" I demanded, taking a step back. "What is this?" Before he could answer, the fog thickened, swallowing him whole. I turned, desperate to find a way out, but the empty lot wasn't empty anymore. The house was back. It stood in front of me, towering and dark, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. The door creaked open, and from the blackness inside, I heard the whispers. "Come inside, Daniels. It's time." I shook my head, backing away. No, I'm not going back in there." But the ground beneath me shifted, pulling me forward. It wasn't like walking. It was like the earth itself was dragging me toward the house. My feet moved without my permission, each step heavier than the last. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were deafening. "Don't fight it. You belong here. It's your turn." I reached the porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The door swung wider, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My flashlight was gone, my gun useless. I tried to scream, to fight, to run, but it was no use. The house had me, and then I woke up. Or at least I thought I woke up. I was in my apartment, the morning sun streaming through the windows. For a moment, I let myself believe it was just a dream, that I was safe. But when I got out of bed, I noticed something was off. The air smelled like mildew. The walls felt damp. And when I looked out the window, I didn't see the city. I saw Pine Street. The house was there, waiting, its door wide open. I don't know if this is real, or if I'm still dreaming, or if the house has finally won. All I know is I'm back. And this time, I don't think I'm getting out. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it wasn't possible. That this had to be another dream. A vivid, suffocating nightmare my mind had conjured to punish me for stepping foot into that cursed house. But no amount of pinching my arm or splashing water on my face made a difference. When I opened my apartment door, I wasn't stepping into the hallway of my building. I was stepping onto Pine Street. It was dead silent. No cars, no birds, no wind. Just the oppressive, heavy stillness that pressed against my chest and made it hard to breathe. The house loomed in front of me, more sinister than ever. Its windows were darker. Its walls seemed to pulse like they were alive. The front door creaked, as if exhaling, beckoning me inside. I told myself to turn around, to run. But as I backed away, my feet hit something solid. When I turned, Garrett was there, standing inches from me. His pale, puppet-like face was blank, his hollow eyes fixed on mine. "You're not leaving," he said. His voice wasn't just a voice. It was layered with all the whispers I'd been hearing, each one overlapping in a maddening symphony of despair. "You were chosen, Daniels. You always were." I tried to step around him, but his hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His grip was ice cold, his fingers digging into my flesh with unnatural strength. "Let me go," I shouted, struggling to break free. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of mildew and decay. "It won't stop, Daniels. Not until you accept it. Not until you go back." With a sudden burst of strength I didn't know I had, I wrenched my arm free and stumbled backward. Garrett didn't follow. He just stood there, watching me with that same blank expression. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What does the house want?" He tilted his head, almost as if he pitied me. It doesn't want anything. It exists to consume, to take, and now you're part of it. I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the cracked pavement as I fled down the street. But no matter how far I went, the house was always there, waiting at the end of every block. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto the ground. When I looked up, the house was in front of me again, its door wide open, its darkness spilling out like smoke. Garrett's voice echoed in my head. You can't outrun it. You never could. I don't remember walking inside, but I was there, standing in the living room, the door slamming shut behind me. The walls were alive now, pulsing and writhing like they were made of flesh. The whispers were deafening, overlapping and chaotic. I was drawn to the basement door, my body moving on its own. This time, I didn't hesitate. I descended the stairs, each step echoing like a drumbeat. The circle was still there, glowing faintly, but now it wasn't empty. The woman was standing in the center, her black eyes fixed on me. But she wasn't alone. Shadows writhed around her, twisting and forming into shapes. Faces. Familiar faces. My face. You're ready now, she said, her voice echoing with 100 others. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This isn't real. This can't be real. She smiled, her grin splitting her face unnaturally wide. You don't need to understand, Daniels. You just need to let go. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around me, pulling me toward the circle. I screamed, fighting with everything I had, but it was useless. They were too strong. As they dragged me into the center, the last thing I saw was her face, inches from mine, her grin wider than ever. Welcome home, she whispered. I woke up in my cruiser, parked outside the precinct. The sun was rising, the city alive with the sound of traffic and voices. For a moment, I thought it was over, that I'd escaped. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The house. It was faint, reflected in the glass, but it was there, watching, waiting, and in the distance I heard the whispers. They followed me. I don't know how long I have before the house takes me for good. But if you're reading this, remember my story. If you're ever on Pine Street and you see that house, run. And don't stop running. I thought it was over. I told myself I could live with it. Live with the whispers, the dreams, the faint reflection of the house in every mirror, every window. But the truth is, you can't live with something like that. Not when it wants you back. It started happening during the day. The whispers followed me to the precinct, seeping through the static of the radio. My colleagues noticed how pale I'd gotten, how I'd flinch at every shadow. I tried to ignore it, but ignoring something doesn't make it go away. Yesterday, I found a picture on my desk. It wasn't there when I sat down. It was of me standing in front of the house. The picture was old, faded and worn like it had been taken years ago, but it was unmistakable. The house looked newer, its windows intact, its paint fresh, and I was smiling. That night, I didn't bother sleeping. I sat in my apartment with every light on, my gun on the table in front of me. It didn't matter. At exactly 3 a.m., the lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The whispers came immediately, louder now, surrounding me, filling my head until I thought it would split open. Come back. It's time. You can't hide forever. I grabbed my gun, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. And then I saw it, the reflection of the house, shimmering faintly in the black TV screen. But this time, it wasn't just a reflection. The front door was open, and Garrett was standing in it. His pale face was blank, his hollow eyes staring straight at me. He lifted a hand and beckoned me forward. The floor beneath me groaned, and when I looked down, I realized I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was standing on the porch of the house. This time, I didn't run. There was no point. The house had won. It always wins. I stepped through the door, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and rot. The whispers quieted, replaced by a deep, pulsing hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Garrett was waiting for me in the living room, his body stiff and unnatural. "You've fought long enough," he said. But the house always gets what it wants. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my chest tight. "Go to the basement," Garrett said, stepping aside. "It's time to take your place." I didn't want to move, but my legs betrayed me, carrying me toward the basement door. It swung open on its own, the orange glow from the circle below spilling out like liquid fire. The stairs creaked as I descended, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the bottom, I could barely stand. The circle was brighter now, its symbols shifting and twisting like living things. The woman was there, her grin wider than ever, her black eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You're finally home," she said. The shadows moved around her, taking shape, forming into people. Officers, neighbors, strangers. Their faces were familiar and empty all at once. And in the center of the circle was something new. A mirror. It wasn't a normal mirror. Its surface shimmered like water, rippling as though something inside was trying to break free. "Look," the woman whispered, her voice soft and commanding. I didn't want to, but my head turned on its own, my eyes locking onto the mirror's surface. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, slowly, a figure emerged. It was me, but it wasn't just me. The reflection grinned, its mouth stretching unnaturally wide. Its eyes were black pits, endless and consuming. It raised a hand and pointed at me, just as Garrett had on the street. "You've always belonged here," it said, its voice layered with 100 others. "Now, take your place." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around me, pulling me into the circle. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was my reflection stepping out of the mirror, its grin widening as it took my place. I woke up in my cruiser again, parked on Pine Street, but something was wrong. The streets were empty. No cars, no people, no sound. The house was there, pristine and whole, its windows glowing faintly. I got out of the cruiser, but my movements felt wrong, stiff and unnatural. My reflection in the car window grinned at me, its eyes black. I wasn't me anymore. I was part of it. And now, as I write this, I know the truth. The house doesn't just take you, it replaces you. So if you ever see me, if I show up at your door, if I call your name, don't trust me. It's not me. And whatever you do, don't go near the house.